The latest crime statistics reveal that South African women continue to bear the brunt of violent attacks. 969 women were killed, just over 10,512 women were raped, and there were 1,485 attempted murders of women were reported. Over 15,000 women were assaulted in the first 3 months of 2023. Now, these results were revealed by Police Minister Bheki Cele on the 30th of May. For more on this, we are joined by Lisa Vetten, who's a gender-based violence researcher. Lisa, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, the crime stats in the first 3 months of just this year paint a very grim picture of how women continue to bear the brunt of violent attacks in South Africa, be it rape, murder, or assault. What's your perspective?
I think these statistics are extremely worrying, and I think they become more worrying when you put them in context. I think the problem with releasing statistics every 3 months is that our understanding of the trend over time is being eroded. We actually need to look at these figures over a period of a year and be able to compare them over a 5-year period and 10-year period. So what has happened in the last year is very concerning. Our figures, women's figures for murder are now well over 3,900. That is extremely concerning. It's quite an increase from where it was in the mid-2010s, around about 2015, so when they were sitting at around about 2,900. And I think if you look at that's in the last 2 years that we've seen the increase happening. So it's really deep cause for concern, and it prompts a really big question. What is happening to drive the increase? And is it in any way related to the increases that are also driving men's murders, or are there a separate set of factors driving the increases in women's murders?
Yeah. It's a really important question that I want us to touch on in just a moment. But let's perhaps also talk about the stats that are revealing a 20% decline in child murders, but a 29% rise in attempted murders, which is compared against the same period, last year. 28 children are violently attacked every day. 3 of them don't survive. What does this tell us now about our society? How do we interpret such outcomes?
I think it's going to go back to the point I made previously, that within the last 4 to 5 years, you can see a very disturbing shift has happened, and that violence has increased, whether to women, children, or men. Something has altered in South Africa. And again, I think it's important to look at the question of children's murders, again, within the context of a year. Because although the last 3 months may have seen a decrease on the same period last year, if you look at the last 12 months, actually children's murders have also increased again. So once again, I think there are much bigger questions that need to be asked. And it's also challenged us around how do we use statistics more effectively? How do we use them as a source of information to understand and take effective action? Because clearly, whatever we're doing, it's not effective.
Yeah, and as we try and ask those questions, I mean, what is the driving factor? Just looking at the research that you've come in contact with, is it rage? Is it revenge? What is it?
We would need to do really good docket analysis to be able to understand that. But I think if we look at what's happening in the country broadly, a worsening of economic situations, a rise in unemployment, a broader increase in violence generally. So I think all those kinds of situations which point to greater levels of stress, reduced capacity to be able to deal with things, the rise in criminality, all of those are in some way combining. So, I mean, one of the questions I have is that where we've had decreases in women's murders over a period of almost 20 years, those have been in relation to stranger murders. So my question in seeing these numbers go up is the increase predominantly coming from strangers' murders of women, or is it from their partners? Because that difference is important in helping us understand motivation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the human toll of this violence is also far-reaching and has a devastating physical impact. But how does it impact the development of children, families, and perhaps society at large?
No, the murder of a mother or the loss of a mother, especially under violent circumstances, can have quite a profound impact on children. Firstly, if the murder was at the hands of the father, I mean, I think it leaves a child in a very complicated situation because they've effectively lost both parents, assuming, of course, that the father is convicted. But the loss of the parent may mean that their entire living circumstances become very unstable. They may go into foster care. They may go through a series of caregivers so that they have no stability, no predictability. That has impact on their sense of security in the world, their sense of trust in the world. I think it also will depend on the developmental age of a child. You know, the loss of a parent can be more profound at some ages than at others. I think it also just destroys their ability to feel safe in the world after you've lost a parent. So the consequences are very serious.
So when it comes to trying to find solutions, I mean, you've asked some really imperative questions, but in trying to find solutions, what will it take? Is it government? Is it communities? Is it a kind of culture shift that needs to happen?
There's a lot of things that need to happen. I think firstly, the increases coincide with the introduction of the government's plan, the National Strategic Plan to address gender-based violence and femicide. So it's very concerning that at the same time this plan has been introduced, we've still seen increases. So it may mean that the assumptions we made about let's put in place new laws are not effective necessarily in preventing. They might respond after the fact, but they are clearly not effective in terms of preventing. So if you want to understand those questions, I think we need as a matter of urgency research, because this is a trend. It's not just a one-year anomaly. It's a trend now that we're seeing to shift that we need to understand. So it would mean things like looking at why are these shifts greater in some provinces than in other provinces? Because one did see, for instance, that Mpumalanga was recording a decrease in women's murders, whereas Eastern Cape was recording an increase. And Eastern Cape's increase was predominantly in stranger rapes. Whereas if you go to a province like Northern Cape, almost 2/3 of women when they're murdered are being murdered by their partners.
Yeah.
Very different to the Eastern Cape. So it's understanding that, and then once you look at that, trying to understand what does this mean that we have to do. Is it about making protection orders work more effectively, for instance? Is there ineffective policing going on? Is this woman being caught in the crossfire, for example, of some of the mass murders that we've seen happening in hostels and homesteads, for instance? So it's trying to unpack that to come up with really informed interventions to try and decrease what we are seeing.
You mentioned protection orders. Where are they falling short?
You know, a protection order is a very important way of trying to prevent further violence. And we have previously seen in the past that even with protection orders, women have still been murdered. In 2017, the number of women being murdered with protection orders showed a very significant decrease, which suggests that the police were doing their job. But in the past couple of years, we've started to see women once again being murdered with protection orders. We've also seen that when women apply for protection orders, their partner's firearms are not being taken away, even though the courts have ordered that. And I mean, a removal of a firearm is quite an easy way to try and reduce the likelihood of a murder. So I think it's those questions. Are the courts responding effectively? Are firearms being removed? Are the police coming out when they're called? Are women being taken to shelters? All those kinds of questions need to be factored in to understanding if protection orders and the police are working as they should.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Let's perhaps leave it there for now. Lisa Vetten, a gender-based violence researcher, speaking and reacting to some of the alarming crime stats.